Well, first off, thank you everybody for attending. Really appreciate the support, especially for a shout out to Carla, Cassie, and all of the WSDA team for your support in getting this Pest Watch webinar up and running. Could not have done it without you guys. Thank you so much. And with that said, my name is Josh Milnes. I'm with Washington State Department of Agriculture. I'm part of the Plant Protection Department studying the spotted lanternfly. And I'm going to give an overview of this pest and let you guys know what's kind of happening with WSDA. Before I go, I would be amiss not to talk about our actual, what we believe in our actual mission. I just thought I'd read that off to you guys, but our mission basically is through service, regulation, advocacy. Washington State Department of Agriculture, WSDA, supports the viability and vitality of agriculture while protecting consumers and the public health and the environment. This, of course, is an umbrella that protects all of our projects here with the state. And so it's just important that you kind of know where we stand on when it comes down to agriculture. So I mentioned spotted lanternfly. Kind of wanted to talk about what is a lanternfly anyways, for those who don't know what the spotted lanternfly is. It's actually a plant hopper in the family Phagorid. Its Latin name is Lacoma delicatula. There's about 129 genera with about 696 species worldwide. Only 9 genera and 17 species are present in North America. And worldwide, Lacoma is represented by 7 species. Like most plant hoppers, they use their proboscis to feed on sap. Think of it like a long straw that they use to feed on the host plants. This is done with what's called a piercing sucking effect, where they feed on carbohydrates found in the phloem sap of the nutrient-rich compounds, which many other plant plant products, usually lacking toxins. Here, I just wanted to show you what the actual proboscis looks like. The body of this insect is actually fairly large. It's about the size of your thumb, about an inch long, roughly. And you can see here the proboscis is about 1/4 of an inch, and it's a straw-like mouth part. There are tiny little hair-like stylets inside of that little straw. It's kind of hard to think, but that's true. These they're just a little thinner than a human hair, and they get inserted into the plant's tissue. And this is what spotted lanternflies use to salivate, and the probe and puncture the actual plant. Again, spotted lanternfly is a generalist feeder. It can feed on pretty much anything. They can easily adapt to their surroundings, which makes them a formidable pest when it comes down to agriculture. I'd like to give a quick background of the actual life cycle of the lanternfly. So basically what we'll do is we'll kind of start with the first generation. You've got basically eggs. The female will lay some eggs on a substrate. These eggs are coated with a particular spongy material that is waterproof and it insulates the eggs to protect the eggs from the weather, the environment in general. It's also effective camouflage. When this spongy material hardens, or ages, I should say, it actually kind of turns a little bit on a brown, kind of grayish color and can be kind of difficult to spot. So it gives them an additional protection. There's between 30 to 50 eggs per egg mass. A little bit more on that down the road. This insect is interesting because, unlike many of the other hemipterans or other Phagorids, this particular group of Lacomas, they actually reproduce about 4 nymphs instead of 5 nymphs. Here you can see some nymphs on a sticky card that crawl, and they're crawling all over, up and down the substrates, specifically Tree of Heaven. They'll go after others, more on that a little bit, but they like to crawl around and search out for food. They don't have wings. They do have what's called wing pads, and they're developing. Here you can see adults towards October, September, and November. This is when the adults emerge. This is when you start getting, you see a lot of complaints from homeowners, particularly between the fourth and final instar to the actual adult stage. This is where a lot of homeowners are going to start saying, hey, look, I've got a problem. And of course, around October, you're going to see a lot more egg production. And it just kind of gets worse from there. Oh, I should also point out they overwinter as eggs. That's actually what makes them very formidable because they're able to um, go around. And of course, this is how they are very effective at hitchhiking. So we've talked a little bit about the biology of this insect, um, but I kind of wanted to cover where did they originally come from? So spotted lanternfly is native to Asia and is actually found all over China, Bangladesh, and Vietnam. It was actually introduced to Japan, South Korea, and recently in 2014, sadly, in the state of Pennsylvania in Burnt County. This image here shows a geographical map highlighting just how far away from its natural habitat spotted lanternfly is capable of spreading. In South Korea, it quickly got out of hand and spread all over the country in a matter of just 3 very short years. They consider it an invasive species where it's been reported to be negatively impacting grapes and peaches all over. In Pennsylvania, the story has been significantly different, and that's actually thanks to those who are working very hard to control this pest. With that said, spotted lanternfly has been detected in actually 17 eastern states now. As of November of 2024, the state of Georgia declared, or the feds declared the state of Georgia as the 18th state. So this is a rapidly spreading pest in North America. But our colleagues on the East Coast have done a great job doing everything they can to prevent it from going to the West Coast. So then that's kind of where we're standing right now. What makes this guy formidable is they can move between 3 to 4 miles. They're actually pretty good at jumping. They're poor flyers, but they do have wings. And when I was on the East Coast, I was able to find some of these. And I'll tell you what, I was shocked when I tried to grab one with my bare hands. Because of its powerful hind legs, I actually lost one. It just flung out of my hands. It was quite an incredible moment. I couldn't believe it. But that's what makes these guys able to move around effectively is because they can jump away and dodge predation, etc. I wanted to show you here the distribution of Pennsylvania, where originally it started in Burke County. Notice the blue highlighted counties. Those have established spotted lanternfly infestations. Purple dots that are peppered all throughout these states have actually, those are interceptions, not declared yet as infestations are established. The red lining surrounding many of the blue established sites, those are quarantine zones. Just to give you a heads up, this is what's happened. This was back in 2013. Now, look at what we're seeing. We're seeing a much higher population spreading, and it's been found now in Chicago, Illinois, which unfortunately is actually the gateway to the West Coast. There's been a couple of interceptions in California. One last year in March, which was actually significant. There was a art installation that was shipped over from New York, and it was brought and it drove all the way over to the border of California. And thanks to our colleagues over there, they were able to, in the plant protection program down in California, they were able to intercept the art installation. Ironically, the art installation was going to go to a vineyard, actually, in the Napa Valley. Kind of a ironic moment for a spotted lanternfly to potentially have been released in a grape commodity. But the good news is our colleagues intercepted the art, and there was about a little over 30 egg masses, viable egg masses on it. And they were able to prevent the egg masses from being, well, they killed them all, let's put it that way, which was wonderful. So again, we've had interceptions also in Oregon. Luckily, same story. They've been able to prevent those specimens from establishing, and some of them were dead upon arrival as well. Now, here in Washington State, fortunately, as of this moment, we have not had any detections or interceptions of lanternfly. We kind of want to keep it that way. But again, I just wanted to show everybody this map and just remind everyone that they are spreading, and they're very difficult to control once they get a foothold. So again, vigilance. That's going to be a kind of a theme that we, with WSDA, we keep kind of pushing forward, which is keep an eye out. So on the East Coast, back in 2017, there was a study conducted, and they found that over $300 million is lost annually due to the presence of this insect. And this is, of course, agricultural commodity, forestry, jobs, etc. This is a staggering figure and an unfortunate one at that. What makes them very difficult is that there's about 172 host plants that will go after. And one in particular that they actually need in their life cycle is actually the tree of heaven. And this is actually a pest, noxious weed that's been found. And if you can see here in this map of the North America, it's on highlighted blue. All of these states, in addition to up into Canada as well, have actually confirmed tree of heaven. Obviously, maybe the other states, there tree of heaven in those states as well that are in the white. But the point of the matter is that these there's a land bridge basically paving the way for this pest. Some statistics suggest that this insect as a community is spreading 12 miles per year. So that's actually a bit of a scary statistic when you think about it. So we talked about tree of heaven, Atlantis altissima. This is actually a Class C weed here in Washington State. It's not required for control in any county. However, because of pests like spotted lanternfly, we're taking the initiative and we're trying to remove tree of heaven at key sites, ports of entry, areas like parks, next to rail yards. That way we can prevent the spread of spotted lanternfly, because it seems that rail yards are the key to its spread on the East Coast. Obviously, we have a lot of rail yards that come from Chicago all the way over here to the Pacific Northwest. It is an important reproductive host for spotted lanternfly. Research has shown that without tree of heaven, lanternfly efficacy goes down about 7%. So they need to be exposed to this tree. They can also produce toxins that suppress native vegetation. So these tree of heaven really do like to kind of take over. It has a perennial life cycle. It's also a difficult tree to cut down. You can't just cut it down and expect that you solve the problem. You got to go after the roots. So if you cut down one tree in 1 year, you might come back the following year, have a dozen growing out of the roots. So they produce root suckers. They're dioecious, meaning they have both male and female trees. Females produce seeds. And so it really comes down, it's important to point out that stems can also sprout suckers as well. But it's important to get to the roots when you're trying to deal with this invasive species. There's a lot of tree of heaven in Washington State. You can see here all of the red dots. These red dots indicate tree of heaven up and down the I-5 corridor, all the way over the Highway 90. Spokane has a lot of rail yard, and I suspect that these are areas and hotspots like Clark County and King County. These are hotspots where lanternfly could potentially be established and do just fine in. There was a research paper published back in 2000 by Dr. Wake and Dr. Wee. This paper suggests that the lower Yakima Valley and the whole of Walla Walla, the whole growing industry, is optimal habitat for this insect pest. And if you look at Thurston County, all the way up to the San Juans, these are regions that lanternfly would do honestly well in. So this is a concern to the industry, especially when we have, billions of dollars of investment here. So again, I just wanted to show that, there is a risk because of this pest. And with the amount of interceptions we've found in Oregon and California, merits real concern for the industry here. So what are they doing exactly? So spotted lanternfly, we mentioned they have 172 different host plants that they will go after. But one of the main ones that they'll go after are actually grapes. They'll also go after hops. They'll go into apples, cherries, all of our specialty crops. And specifically, they do very well in grapes. We've had horrible stories from the East Coast regarding this pest and how it's been able to wipe out vineyards. What they'll do is they'll feed on the actual tissue and excrete what's called honeydew. Basically, it's a sugary substance that they will excrete as their frass. Frass basically in the entomology community is their poop. So they'll cover the leaves and grapes with this frass, which promotes sooty black molds to come over and really kind of choke the actual plant. So this is what is the concern to the industry. Very difficult to deal with later in the field season. In response, since 2018, WSDA has actually been surveying for spotted lanternfly. We do what's called a grape survey, where we actually place traps out looking for multiple grape commodity pests. And we're also taking visuals of this insect, looking all over vineyards, inspecting them for spotted lanternfly. I mean, we've been doing this now for multiple years, and we'll be doing it again in 2025, where we'll go out in the field. All of these purple spots you see scattered on this map, these indicate grape vineyards. And then visuals are these orange squares. And what we do with the orange squares is we go out in the field, we'll look under leaves, we'll look under the actual stems, we'll look everywhere to find where these lanternflies are going. We don't just look in the vineyards as well, we'll go in urban areas, we'll also look in downtown, anywhere where a lanternfly could start out as. And so again, we're trying to be proactive because it's no longer a question of are these pests coming? It's when are these pests coming? And so again, being proactive will be key. I don't know about everyone, but I particularly would love to be the first state, if it ever got established here, to say, hey, we eradicated it. No one's been able to say that over on the East Coast, and that's very concerning in my opinion. Again, in our survey, these are all pests that we look for with our grape surveys. And up to this point, we have actually had really great news. None of our targeted pests have we actually found in the actual grape and stone fruit surveys. So this has actually been very good news for the industry. Again, just to reiterate on the actual pests, here the stars are the negative visual sites that we've found. No lanternfly in Washington State. Next, this year, we're actually going to be placing traps out in the field. I've highlighted with circles areas that we're going to be targeting this year. In addition to our visual surveys, we're going to be placing traps out in areas that have high shipment or high traffic ports of entry, regions where these particular lanternflies could actually sneak into our state. So we'll be monitoring at key areas this year. I mentioned that this insect pest has around 30 to 50 eggs. It's worth noting that the spotted lanternfly has oops, I said apple maggot. I meant to say spotted lanternfly damage. Excuse me, everyone. This pest is able to lay its eggs on multiple substrates. Here, my boss Sven is actually pointing at a landscape rock that was actually imported over from East Asia, and this is actually at ground zero in Pennsylvania when he was working over there. And so, anyways, interestingly enough, the egg masses, they actually are cryptic. You almost couldn't, if you didn't know what you were looking for, yeah, you very likely would not be able to see this egg mass on this slab of stone. But that's pretty much one of the difficulties about this pest is it can lay its eggs on pretty much any substrate. This also makes it very good at hitchhiking. So, the summer's coming on. There's a lot of people from the East Coast who want to maybe move over here to the west side. Or maybe they want to drive around in their RVs. Well, that's something we need to think about, especially if they're going to be coming over here. They might be bringing some uninvited friends, and these uninvited friends, of course, are lanternflies. So lanternflies will lay on all types of substrates. I had a colleague on the East Coast tell me that he was driving downtown in New Jersey. He was driving on the highway at 60 miles per hour, and lo and behold, he had a lanternfly female that was hanging onto the windshield wiper for dear life. And he pulled over to the side, squished it. But being an entomologist, and let's be honest, all of us entomologists do this, he dissected the abdomen to see if there was any eggs. And sure enough, she was a mated female. The mated females tend to have like a yellow hue to their abdomen that kind of indicates that they've been bred. So again, that's how easy it is to transfer a spotted lanternfly from over there to here. And just to kind of give you an example of why should Washington care, Well, let's say they lay their eggs on a rail car. I mentioned earlier that this is a great way for them to travel. Well, whoo, there we go. My complicated animation for the day. But that's actually, it would what, take 5 days roughly to get over here. More than enough time because they can stay in an egg stage for several months. So if you got a couple of rail cars coming over and hanging out with some of our spurs off the main rail yard, um, that's a great way of transitioning into our Pacific Northwest. So again, this is why I care, and I think everyone else cares as well, that it's no longer a question of are they coming, but when are they coming? So in response to this, we've collaborated with multiple agencies and programs, even within the state of Washington State. With the Washington Invasive Species Council, we developed a action plan. I won't elaborate too much on it because Jessica will be later today giving a little bit more detail on this. But it's important that we have a plan of attack. When this pest comes, what does the state do? And what are we going to be doing and how we're going to be dealing with this pest in its early established time, if it does establish. Hopefully we can intercept it and say, hey, we eradicated it. We've also been developing a action plan or response toolkit. So when the call is given, we're going to be having backpacks full of equipment so the inspectors can rush out into the field and not have to waste their time. So again, we're trying to be very aggressive with our response. Another project that we're involved with here at the state is looking at long-term solutions. I've been collaborating with researchers on the East Coast, looking at host range testing of Duranus sinicus. This is a really cool wasp. It's actually a parasitic wasp that will attack the nymph stage of spotted lanternflies. And what they do is they actually will insert their egg inside of the nymph, and then like an alien, it will grow outside and create this little sac and then suck on the hemolymph, or AKA the blood of the nymph, till they suck it dry. It's kind of a vampire effect. And then what they do is they will pop off of the actual dead nymph once they kill it, and roll into the leaf foliage next to a site where there's high density spotted lanternflies. So what we're doing here at the States, we're collecting leaf hoppers and plant hoppers that are native to Washington State, and we're sending these specimens over to our colleagues on the East Coast, who are going to put them in quarantine in a safe environment so they don't escape. And what they're going to do is expose the leafhopper nymphs to Duranus sinicus and actually see whether or not if this wasp will adapt to the native species of Washington State. We're hoping they won't. That's the whole point of these host range testing. If we want to release this wasp as a biological control, we better make sure that it's a safe wasp to release and it's going only after spotted lanternfly nymphs, not any of our native species. Otherwise, it could itself become a pest. So again, we're trying to do our due diligence to be long-term thinkers. And so this is, again, one of the projects that we're involved in. And I'm hoping, and I can say with the preliminary results that we're getting from East Coast specimens, this seems to be a very effective wasp. And so, again, we're doing our part to help make it so that we can use these wasps in the future. If lanternfly shows up in Washington State, hey, we got a biological control weapon to deal with it. So with that said, I just wanted to say thank you guys. If really, we've got a mission here, and it's pretty clear. If you see it, take a photo of it and report it to us. We got 3 ways here you can communicate with us. There's our pest program email. Use your phone, your Apple device, or your Android device. We've got an app in collaboration with Washington Invasive Species Council. Use that, please, everybody, because it's free. I use it all the time. I think it's a great tool. You can always call us on our 800 number. And again, thank you so much for attending. And with that, I will move on to the next presenter, Dr. Michael Bush. Here's my contact information and my email and my cell phone number. So yes, please give me a call if you have more questions on lanternfly. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks. Before we move into our next presenter.
A quick introduction to myself. I'm Mike Bush. I am serving as the coordinator of the Apple Maggot Survey Program. I am within the WSDA Plant Protection Division, and within that, We are the pest program itself. And so I guess the easiest thing to do is to start off in defining what a pest is and when a pest attracts our attention. To begin with, it seems like a simple concept, but in reality, a pest, there's thousands of definitions of what a pest is, and I just simplify it by saying a pest is any organism in the wrong place at the wrong time. Spiders are considered beneficial outdoors, but if they're indoors and they have the size of those spiders on the right, I get a little bit concerned. I mean, sure, hobo spider in your basement is a good thing. It's a predator of other spiders and insects. And the spider below that is even larger. And that is a giant house spider that feeds on the hobo spider. Yes, they are beneficial, but when they are in my house, that's the wrong place, wrong time. And furthermore, it does not attract the attention of the pest program. Again, and this definition is difficult because it's more than just a pest that attracts the attention of the pest program. For example, the European honeybee, well, that is definitely an exotic pest, an exotic insect. It's not considered a pest unless you trip over a hive and it stings you multiple times. But in reality, it is probably our #1 famous invasive insect. Back to the picture in the middle, that is our northern giant hornet. Obviously a pest, obviously invasive, and is obviously got our attention as an invasive pest, and perhaps the best leading uh, success that WSDA has in eradicating a pest here in Washington State. The picture on the right is a large moth called the Atlas moth that has about a 9-inch wingspan. Pretty collector's item. But the odd thing about that is the larvae itself will feed on cherry trees and other closely related trees. So this is definitely considered more than just a collector's item. It is an invasive pest. All right, now we got to expand the pest to beyond that definition, beyond insects. Of course, some of the pests that the pest program will look at is plant diseases. Some of the other pests that have been looked at by the Washington Invasive Council has been pigs and squeal on the pigs program. And certainly there are folks, including Josh, that look at some of the invasive weeds, including tree heaven and Scotch thistle that's here in this picture. And throughout the day, we'll see some other aquatic weeds, some other aquatic organisms, including mussels and snails. So lots of things fall in the definition of pests. All right, now there's one other concept that we got to go over really quickly, and that is there are pests of national concern and pests of state concern. Now, European praying mantid, yep, that's an exotic insect, but it's not considered a pest unless you happen to feel that it is out competing some of the native praying mantid species in the area. That doesn't happen here in Washington State. Elm seed bug is another insect that has been found to be a nuisance. It is an exotic pest, invasive pest, but it has little to no economic value. It's just a nuisance pest to homeowners when it tries to come in the spring to get out of the cold. Another is the brown marmorated stink bug, and yes, for a while that was a pest of national concern. But in today, it has become well established in the East Coast and throughout Washington State, and it is dropped from something that is considered a pest of concern on the national level. Japanese beetle, that is a pest for sure, and it is widespread throughout eastern North America. So while it has become a pest of state concern, it is no longer a pest of national concern. And it has not been a pest of national concern for probably 40, 50 years. So speaking of pests of national concern, one of the things the pest program is looking at is pests of grapes that fall under the national priority. And here's a list of that, including the spotted lanternfly that Josh is looking at. And he will be spending part of his summer with a team looking for spotted lanternfly and these other pests in grape vineyards. All right, this is going to be the most complicated slide that I show you today, and this is really what we call our program's guiding principle. And we are looking at infested area versus time. And let's see, there we go, spotted lanternfly. Spotted lanternfly has yet to be introduced that we know of here in Washington State. But certainly if Josh is out there and captures it as soon as it comes in, the chances of us being able to find it, detect it, and eradicate it is much higher than the chances of us detecting, well, not detecting, but eradicating apple maggot, which is widespread throughout the West Coast. So again, early detection is very critical in success and eradication. And so we are working towards that with spotted lanternfly and some other species that we'll talk about today. Um, and the hope is to detect it soon enough before we get up into this range where the only options we have is local mitigation and eradication is unlikely. So about regulatory entomology, and if you listen to Josh, what Josh was saying, he probably, yeah, he did. He went through every single one of these stages in what is happening with spotted lanternfly. So the number one thing that we have to do is assess the impact of these invasive insects. That's how we become proactive. And Josh showed some scenes of studies that showed that spotted lanternfly will do very well here in certain portions of Washington. He has also provided some impact of what this invasive species would have on grapes and hops and other crops here in Washington State. The next thing that he went through was determining potential pathways of these, in this case, insect pests to invade new areas. Another strategy that we'll use is we'll sit there and we will look at quarantines to try to pose a barrier to some of those invasive insects. Sure, in this picture, we're looking at a road sign, which is not a particularly good barrier, but I guarantee you with commercial fruits, there are barriers that defend these apple maggot pest-free areas. Another thing, the regulatory component of regulatory entomology is detecting the insect pest as soon as possible. The earlier we detect them, the better our chances of eradicating them. Another aspect of regulatory entomology, and Josh again showed it in his response kit. And that is, we will come up with a response plan that will contain, eradicate the invasive insect, stopping it from spreading within our state. All right, now I'm going to go through kind of what we've done with apple maggot in regulatory entomology. And as I said, one of the first things we do is create an impact. And certainly the apple industry is big here in Eastern Washington, and we have done a thorough job in documenting the importance of the apple industry here in Eastern Washington. Um, um, it is important to point out that this impact of apple maggot is on Washington state. Turns out apple maggot is not a pest of national concern because apple maggot is established over on the East Coast. Now, the reason it has an economic impact is it is, as a maggot, a direct pest of the apple fruit, rendering the apple rather inedible. As we begin to look at pathways, Josh put up a life cycle of spotted lanternfly. He also helped in creating this pathway for apple maggot. And most important as you look at this is apple maggot is a fly. It doesn't fly very well, but that is one of the things that we look at trying to intercept and stop the spread of apple maggot. Apple maggot may also spread through as a egg or a larva in the apple itself as the apple travels throughout the area. And another thing that we'll mention briefly is the apple maggot will overwinter as puparia in soil under the host plants, leading to another pathway that WSDA has paid attention to and hopefully is shut down. Back again. Here's the odd thing about apple maggot is apples are not native to North America, but apple maggot is. And so we believe that the original host is hawthorn. And when we do our surveys, we are looking at apples, crab apples, and hawthorns as possible means of apple maggot traveling from one area to the next. Okay, so here we see perhaps apple maggot fly is, we accuse it of host shifting, going from hawthorn, which we believe was the original host, to apples. And as Johnny Appleseed laid the trail of apples from East Coast to West Coast, apple maggot fell in behind, followed that trail. Of course, one of the other things that might be very efficient in spreading apple maggots is cows, as they eat the apples and spread it from one area to the other. Any rate, that's something we don't have any control of, little control of, but we have been managing the apples in waste. And so we do spend a lot of time looking and trying to stop the spread of apple maggot through solid waste, green wastes in our state. Providing barriers. I'd mentioned this a little bit. Quarantines are those barriers. They're a legislative fix. And the apple maggot survey is actually, the funding for that comes all from the state. Because like I said, remember, this is not a pest of national concern. It is a pest of state concern. And so in enforcing that, the tree fruit industry is assessing the apple growers a certain amount of money on fresh fruit, and that money is used to run our program. Um, while I said that the quarantine works very well with commercial fruits and is enforced by WSDA fruit and vegetable inspection. It's a little bit difficult to enforce this on homeowners, and on that we do rely heavily on public outreach through WSDA and our partners at WSU Extension. This apple maggot survey, our goals, this is to determine the pest-free areas of Washington State, certify, conduct certification based on monitoring around commercial orchards, and to monitor waste facilities and any other potential pathway of pest movement from one area to the other. We have found a lot of research through USDA that one of the best ways to monitor apple maggot is the yellow sticky traps. And so every year we'll put out thousands of these sticky traps in hosts, which include apples, crab apples, and hawthorns throughout eastern Washington. Ironically, or luckily, the apple maggot trapping season, which is when the flies are available and land on these traps, it runs from June to most of it September, which is a great time for hiring people to help us out with the monitoring itself. Since we are putting out over 5,000 to 7,500 yellow sticky traps each year. And where we put them is very, very important. And what we're on is important. And this is kind of a map that shows generally where our trapping sites are. And if you were to overlay apple production areas, you would find a very strong match between where our traps are and where the apple industry is. Now, one of the problems we run into is there's a lot of insects that will be mistaken for apple maggot. As you look at these images, you'll see that the wing patterns seem to change a little bit from apple maggot to western cherry fruit fly to walnut husk. But we run into problems with the snowberry fly and detecting that from and distinguishing that from apple maggot. So when we put these yellow sticky traps out, our trappers find something like they call a suspect fly on those traps. They bring it into the lab. We have a group of people that are trained to look and dissect, look at these flies under a microscope, dissect them out, and determine whether this is apple maggot or snowberry. Now, there actually is somewhat of a race going on in this, in that once a fly is captured and a trapper says, hey, I think I have a suspect fly on our trap, we have 1 to 2 weeks turnaround. When that fly is captured or when that fly is detected on the trap to when we have brought the trap in, dissected it, and determined what confirmed it as apple maggot. Then the other important thing is the response in what we do in response with apple maggot. And this is important and very important to have cooperation and collaboration between multiple entities, including the horticultural pest and disease boards. We'll notify them about where exactly the site is. We will also notify F&V inspectors the exact place where that fly is captured. And so these both initiate responses from the county hort board that does what they can to control the pests, whether it's spraying the tree, nuking the tree, removing the tree, or picking off all the fruit on the tree. There's lots of things that they could do. F&V then comes out and does some management and inspection of fruit to make sure that any fruit that passes from a quarantine area to a pest-free area has been inspected before it moves. And so then WSDA, our survey, will go in, collect any remaining fruit, see if there's any larvae that drop out of that fruit afterwards. And this will give us a good idea how good our response plan is doing. And so that's a wrap. That is the talk. Like I said, one of the key strengths and key weaknesses of this is all the collaboration between federal, state, county, commodity groups, and the growers in trying to control and contain the apple maggot and keep apples grown from Washington State and marketed overseas free of apple maggot. There we are. Time for questions. If not, I do know that I'll be visiting the questions section.
So I'm going to be talking about new and old challenges for pollinators, and especially some current events that are happening right now and what's going on and what can you do about it. So first off, because some people apparently don't know what pollinators are. Pollinators are really just an organism that moves pollen from the anther of a flower to a stigma of another flower. That's it, except it's complicated because there's a lot of them. There are beetles, there are wasps, there are ants and butterflies and moths. Flies are incredibly good pollinators and very important. There's some stuff that kind of does it accidentally while they're eating the plants. There are birds, there are mammals, which are mostly bats and not in Washington. I had to check. And of course, there are bees. We talk a lot about bees. Why? Mostly because of this bee, the honeybee. They're really important for agriculture. But pollinators in general are really important. 1 second. Sorry, my cat didn't like that I was talking. So 90% of flowering plant species total require some kind of biotic pollinator. And many pollinators are specialists and they're tightly linked to a genus or species of plant. That includes 75% of crop species, which is about 1/3 of our diet, and includes most of the things that give us, vitamins. Bees especially are important, and a lot of people think of honeybees and they're like, oh, we love honey. Honey's pretty important. And honey is an important source of revenue for commercial beekeepers, but it is far outweighed by their pollination services. So there's a very drastic difference between what people think about pollinators and the services that they're providing us. And it's not only critical for most of our agriculture, but also our ecosystems. Worldwide, pollination services for just food production, so not any of the ecosystem services that they provide, is estimated to be about $577 billion. And a lot of this does rely on Apis mellifera, the European honeybee, which is actually kind of weird for a bee. It's a eusocial perennial species. Eusocial just means it has reproductive division of labor, they care for their young, and there's multiple generations living together. They're cavity nesters, they're native to Europe and Asia, or Europe and Africa. And there can be at least 60,000 bees in one of those big 2-box colonies that you see with one queen, 200 to 300 drones, which are the males. The workers only, just honeybee workers. Out of all of the bees out there, all of the wasps out there, only honeybee workers have a barbed stinger, which means they're the only ones that die when they sting you. Everything else can sting you multiple times. Just fun fact there. But bees in general are actually an incredibly diverse and an important group. There's 20,000 species of them worldwide, over 600 species here in Washington. Most of them are solitary, they're not social. Most of them nest in the ground, not in cavities. There's a really large variation in size and color. So some bees besides honeybees, we have bumblebees, carpenter bees, mason bees, leafcutter bees, sweat bees, longhorn bees, stingless bees, blueberry bees, cuckoo bees. So many different kinds of bees, guys. Here in Washington, the largest ones you're probably going to see are bumblebee queens. They are just coming out this time of year. So if you see a bumblebee and you're like, wow, that's really big, it's a queen. Oh, I apparently did not put in more photos of bees. Anyway, honeybees get talked about a lot because they are our most important managed pollinator. So I'm going to kind of discuss what's going on in the news right now, with what you may have heard, because there have definitely been some very scary articles coming out. Honeybee colonies have, despite very high losses, actually remained somewhat stable for at least a little while. If you look at it in the context of a much longer period of time than what some of the stuff is showing, honeybee colonies really peaked in like the 1940s. And there was kind of a gradual decline after that, and that had more to do with the price of honey and changing agricultural practices than really anything else. Remember, these are managed bees. These are propagated essentially by humans. They're more like cattle than deer. So there was kind of this gradual decline, and unfortunately that decline got a little bit more choppy and sometimes more extreme in the 1980s when varroa mite was introduced. Of course, now we're seeing really high losses just this winter, and this is because, well, we don't know why. We don't have any answers yet. There's a massive amount of testing and surveying that is currently being done to try to figure out what happened this past year. The survey went out to pretty much all the commercial beekeepers in the country, and there was actually an incredibly high response rate, which on the one hand is good. On the other hand, the responses were pretty upsetting and represented a loss of at least 40% of all beehives in the United States, which is kind of massive. So obviously we're very, very concerned about this. At the same time, those are the kind of losses that we were seeing in 2008 with colony collapse disorder. And that turned out to be much more of a blip than anything. And high losses in general have been fairly regular these days, especially in the winter. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't be really concerned, but we're not panicking quite yet. Maybe a little. Unfortunately, like, this is combined with a lot of other really concerning stuff that's been coming out recently. You'll notice this was in early March that there is now evidence of rapid butterfly declines across the United States lately. The Western monarch butterfly population this winter declined to a near record low. It is the second lowest population on record. The American bumblebees, some of these species are really drastically in decline. Some of them are getting federally listed under the Endangered Species Act. So there's a lot that's fairly concerning going on. Why are all these things happening? What is the common factor? Well, there's unfortunately it's always more complicated than that. There's no one common factor. Habitat loss is a really, really big one, and I cannot emphasize that one enough. But habitat loss itself is being impacted or caused by pesticides and invasive species and climate change and pollution. And habitat loss itself is causing poor nutrition for a lot of these pollinators, which then makes them more susceptible, along with the pesticides, to pests and diseases. And so these are all factors that are all impacting each other all at the same time out in our landscapes. And all of these combined are really drastically causing issues to all of our pollinators, all in slightly different ways, but they're all issues. So, what can we do about it? How can we help? What are we doing with this madness? Well, for one thing, we live in a state that decided that pollinators were a really important issue because of our agriculture, because of, they're important to our ecosystems and stuff like that. So we've had a number of bills passed in our legislature that has made pollinators one of the priorities for our state agencies. So it created my program, created the Pollinator Health Task Force. That bill required the Pollinator Health Task Force write up recommendations. That got turned into a bill, 5253. And that did a whole bunch of different things, such as making it illegal to use non-native bumblebees in open field ag use to try to help reduce the amount of invasive species we're maybe introducing. We got a fully funded WSU position on pollinators. Public works projects that include landscaping must have 25% of that be pollinator habitat as practicable. And then several of us agencies, including myself and WDFW and the Conservation Commission, all had new programs and projects that we implemented to try to help pollinators. So WDFW now has this really cool new website on how to create pollinator habitat. I highly recommend it. The Conservation Commission, their Sustainable Farm and Fields grant program does include a priority for pollinator habitat or conserving pollinator habitat. And that's been going gangbusters, apparently. We just implemented Field Watch in this state, so if you want to sign up, you probably should. We're getting growing pretty good at this point, at least on the beekeeper side of things. I have well over 100 beekeepers now in the system, and it's growing daily as of like last week. So specialty crop growers, you can use this too. I have
Katie, can you say what Field Watch is?
Oh, yes, sorry. Field Watch is a communications app. It is free to use for anybody who's not the state, basically. And it helps facilitate communication between growers, beekeepers, and pesticide applicators. So you can post, honestly, you can go on their website and learn a lot more than I can talk about in about 30 seconds, but it helps pesticide applicators know where they really, really shouldn't spray. And it helps them also communicate to people, hey, I am about to spray. You may need to move your hives or cover your hives, or pull field workers out of an area because we detected a pest issue. So it's free to use. It's entirely voluntary, but we're hoping that it helps people reduce the number of pesticide incidents that we have to investigate. That a good explanation, Carla?
Yes, thanks.
Yep, no problem. So anyway, I also have started including a lot more information and stuff on our website. We have a new thing on there, our pollinator forage list. This is a massive list of mostly native species with some non-natives that are excellent pollinator plants and not invasive. What counties they're native to, when they bloom, what pollinators they attract, et cetera, et cetera. So much information in this. We hope that people use this to start putting in more pollinator habitat, and maybe figure out what plants they want to try to have more of on the landscape. We have a bunch of other really cool outreach materials. Some of you may have already seen this one. It's been out for a little while. It's the Pollinator Garden postcards for east and west of the Cascades. There's a very nice plant list on the back. We have a bunch of other stuff for how to be safe in both English and Spanish for protecting bees from pesticides. And then even more recently, we've had even more new legislation. So neonicotinoid pesticides, which have been implicated in a lot of pollinator decline, have been banned in the state, except in ag use and as part of a licensed application. So we were just, the intent of this bill was to reduce the environmental load of neonicotinoids on the landscape while retaining it for their critical uses. There was also another bill, 5934, concerning pollinator habitat that was also intended to basically make it easier for people to have pollinator habitat in like HOAs and stuff like that, basically personal use pollinator habitat, as well as encourage other places to put in more pollinator habitat. So that was kind of cool. I'm trying not to steal people's thunder on this one, but in a big win for honeybees, as well as other things, northern giant hornet was eradicated by the super awesome people of the pest program. We also have started this Washington Bee Atlas. This is super cool. This is literally the funnest thing that I get to work on. We had a project to look at all of our historical data, and we kind of went, wow, that's actually not that bad. And then we took out honeybee and bumblebee records and went, oh no, that's not so good. So we now know we have at least 600 species of bees. Over 400 of those species have 10 or fewer records. Some were last seen in like 1930, 1940. So it's been a while. So we have basically volunteers who go out and they get trained on how to collect bees, and they send them into my taxonomist, Karen. And in our first 2 years of this, we have found a whole bunch of new state records, meaning these are species that we have never found in this state before. Including this one, which might be a new species anyway. We have a couple of dianthidium that were new state records. There was this dioxys, which was a state record and is just a very rare bee in general. Carla found this one. More state records, like this one was a huge range expansion, a new state record. It hasn't even been found in Oregon, and they've had a bee atlas running for years longer than us. So we're finding really cool stuff, but we're trying desperately to fill in these gaps of scientific data because while I can tell you, that honeybees are having problems and butterflies are having problems and bumblebees are having problems, most of these other bee species we don't know enough about to even tell you if they are having problems. So you can become a volunteer. Karen and Caleb will hate me for telling you this. You should totally become a volunteer and join us. It's very fun. You get to go out to really pretty places and collect bees. Or if you're running a specialty crop farm and you want to learn more about what is pollinating your crops, we encourage you to collect bees off of your crops and send them to us and find out what they are. We need that data too. We want to know everything about what pollinators are doing here in Washington. So join us, become a volunteer. It'll be super awesome. If you don't want to do that, you're more focused on growing and you want to know how to help with what you already do, because not everybody has the time in the day. The two main things that we really recommend to people that everybody should be trying to do is one, reducing the use of pesticides, or at least reducing bee poisoning from pesticides as much as possible. There's a very nice PDF from OSU on how to do that, and I don't have the time to go into as much detail. This is normally like an hour-long talk. But the main thing to think about is toxicity and exposure and how that creates risk. So that PDF will tell you like what pesticides are more toxic to bees, and those are the ones to avoid as much as possible. But then you also have to weigh in, when I'm spraying this, are there even going to be bees on the landscape? And so that's the exposure part, which is why we tell people, don't spray when things are in bloom. Avoid bloom treatments. And that is slightly more obvious when it's your crop in bloom, but you may also need to be on the lookout for weeds that are also in bloom, and you may need to mow down those dandelions before you apply a spray treatment. There's a bunch of other tips that you can use depending on what growing system you're in. If you have a beekeeper, consult with them. Talk to them about what you can do to help keep their bees safe. Make sure there's a buffer around their hives if you have to spray around them. But also make sure that there's a buffer to natural habitat. Managed hives, they have somebody who looks out for them. Native habitat often doesn't. So keeping a buffer between that and any nice, good habitat that's supporting your local native bees can be really important. The other thing to kind of keep in mind, because, honeybees are obvious on the landscape. They're in these big white boxes, right? All of our other native pollinators don't live in big white boxes. They live in the ground. They live in hollow stems. If they're butterflies, and then they're feeding on plant material. If they're flies and wasps, most of those are doing your biological control, and they're actually, the larvae are in or on your pests. So they're on insect hosts. They're not in big white boxes. They're out in the landscape. So just being aware that they're out there and they're doing their own thing can really help you be more aware of what's going on, and try to limit spraying as much as possible. I mean, it costs money, so you want to do that anyway. Most of you guys are really part of the solution as it is. So, that really helps limit risk to pollinators that are already on the landscape. But how do you get more pollinators? Well, you have to have nesting habitat or larval hosts, and then you definitely need nectar and pollen resources, i.e. more flowers. In an agricultural setting, what that can look like are flowering crops, having habitat between rows, having patches of pollinator habitat, or hedgerows or ditches, which can be they seem like they're marginal habitat, but they can sometimes be incredibly good habitat. And then you might want to try flowering cover crops, especially if you have a beekeeping buddy who needs some place to put his bees for a while. You can really help him out there. So if you're wondering, how attractive is my specific crop, if you don't want to just go and stand out in the field and listen for the buzzing, there is a USDA publication on that. It has information. I didn't put it in. It has information on basically most of our main crops that are grown in the US and how attractive they are to pollinators and what pollinators are actually pollinating them. Granted, it's fairly general, which is why we're telling you to go out and collect bees from your crops, because we don't always know the specific species. If you don't have a farm, but you still want to help, there's a lot of types of landscaping that provide habitat, besides just monoculture grass lawns. That does not help pollinators realistically. You can, of course, put in a tailored to pollinators pollinator patch or pollinator garden. But even if you're not really trying to help pollinators, stuff like rain gardens, managed natural landscapes, which have gotten more popular because they're usually less maintenance, stuff like xeriscaping, food gardens, and bee lawns are all really great ways to help provide habitat for pollinators. So in general, how can you help? Plant more flowers, preferably natives, but there's a lot of really good non-natives out there, and a mix of both native and non-native have often been shown to actually help a more diverse group of bees than just natives alone. Create habitat with larval host plants for butterflies, nesting habitat, keep areas that are low or no-till. Use IPPM, which is Integrated Pest and Pollinator Management, which is really just IPM, but trying to take in consideration what the pollinators are doing on your landscape. Especially, remember, do not spray when plants are in bloom. Avoid herbicide treatments during key blooms. This is something that's a little bit more critical for those of you who may be on the west side and may be inundated with blackberries. Yeah, I realize how terrible Himalayan blackberries are, but if you can avoid killing them while they're in the middle of blooming, that would be great. Do it like right after bloom before they go to berry stage and spread more of themselves. Definitely plant more flowers. Trees and shrubs count. Everybody thinks of, those beautiful wildflowers, but trees and shrubs can be incredibly important pollinator resources. And please feel free to learn more about your local pollinators, either by becoming a volunteer with us or one of these other very cool organizations. If you're into birds, the Audubon Society is great. But there's a lot of really cool organizations out there that do a lot with pollinators. And if you are a bee nerd, the Washington Native Bee Society is made for you. Maybe you're a butterfly nerd and you want the Washington Butterfly Association. I don't know. I don't judge. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask me. If you ever want me to come give a longer presentation that includes a lot more concrete how to make habitat, I am available for stuff like that. I love giving those talks. So please feel free to contact me whenever you want and ask me questions about pollinators. That's what I'm here for.
Welcome you to the webinar. My name is Cassie Cichorz. I am an outreach specialist at WSDA. So I cover many of the topics here, but today I am going to talk to you about northern giant hornet and Japanese beetle in the terms of them being eradication programs. Now, Josh mentioned at the beginning what WSDA is, how it regulates and advocates and provides services for the ag industry. And you've heard a lot of us from WSDA's PEST program. So from hearing a couple other presenters, you probably learned that we're a dedicated group of individuals who have a pretty big passion for this job. There are entomologists who have a lifetime collecting in and out of the field, scientists who take plant DNA samples, biologists who actually do the outreach and education within communities, scientists doing the backbreaking labor, cutting innovative research, and more current than often than not, working on eradication. I'd like to bring up to you the northern giant hornet. This is actually a successful eradication story as of December last year. WSDA and USDA declared northern giant hornet to not be in Washington state anymore. So typically when I say, hey, a new pest's in town and we want to get rid of it, usually you look at me like I'm crazy, you say never going to happen, never going to work. But here is a tall tale sign that it's possible when everybody works together. It was first discovered in December 2019 and quickly donned the name murder hornet, right? You quickly learn that it doesn't really murder us people, but it really threatens is honeybees. And it also threatens a couple other things. So we were able to actually, this is the nest of a northern giant hornet. We were able to grab the insides out of it, the frass or the insect poop, different things, analyze its DNA to see what the hornets ate while they were here. And in addition to honeybees, here's a hornet's menu. Yellow jackets, wasps, flies, dragonflies, and moths. So in addition to those honeybees, hornets have the potential to harm and mess up our ecosystem and eat other pollinators in different ways. Since it's invasive, it comes over and northern giant hornet is the top of its food chain. It doesn't have any other predators, so it's really up to us to stop the murder hornet. One of the biggest threats off the top of the bat is those honeybees. And what they usually do is they run throughout their life grabbing individual insects, mashing them up into balls, ripping their wings, legs, heads off, and then feeding to each other. So what you see on this screen here is a hornet food pellet. In the fall time, though, they tend to get more hungry, and that is when they really go after our bee boxes and wipe them out. So the screen here, you see decapitated honeybees because the hornets fly up to the box, the honeybees fly out, and the hornet will chop off every single head and drop their bodies. You can see all of those dead bees right there sitting outside of the hive. They will then go inside and harvest the brood and the pupae, take it back to feed their own, and they'll do this until it's no longer viable. They just don't need it or want it anymore. So one of those nice boxes could be gone within the matter of 90 minutes, hence their name, the murder hornet. Now, it's invasive species. We know it's bad. We don't want it here. And I need to get rid of it. I don't know that much about it, but I do know a little bit about its life cycle and about its nest. Here's a couple pieces of that nest that I showed you in the beginning before it's cut open. Here's where the hornets grow. When they emerge from the nest, they are their full adult size, and they frequently go back to the nest with those food pellets to feed to each other. It's also where they live. So when I think about working to eradicate or wanting to get rid of the hornets, I need to find something. I could whack 1 or 2 hornets, but finding them in their nest is going to be key to their eradication. Now, all of the nests that we found in Washington and Whatcom County that you see on this map here in red were inside tree cavities. Before we got to that, we were finding individual hornets. So here's a zoomed in map of all of the detections. That black line is going to be Canada. Any spots you see there are going to be hornet detections, and then the stars you see will be the 4 nests. I alluded to us finding those nests, but how do we get there? WSDA worked behind the scenes to come up with an extensive trapping program. They found that orange juice and rice cooking wine was commonly used in its native range and could attract the hornets. And then they worked to build traps so that when the hornets flew by, they smelled that scent of the bait and they were lured in. Very carefully, they decided that these are materials that people in Washington can actually get, and these are instructions that they can follow, and we reached out to the public and said, hey, can you help as well? So the public, this is a map on the right of all the traps that they set throughout the hunt for the northern giant hornet. In addition to that, we always said, hey, if you see one, let us know. And eventually, through public collaboration, we worked to catch a live northern giant hornet. Scientists work really behind the scenes to learn that this hornet is going to be the key to helping us find the nest. They found this cutting edge technology where they could apply a radio tag transmitter to the hornet, feed the hornet some jam, and actually let it go. And it would fly back to the nest, and then they could use that signal to track it and follow it back to the nest. Now, this wasn't always easy. There was a couple fails along the way, but through trial and error, eventually the state got as good as finding and tracking a hornet in 30 minutes. Now, the hornets make one entrance into their nest. All the nests we found, I told you, were in the snags of trees, but in their native range, they actually could be in the ground at the base of rodent burrows where trees are rotted out, and these nests could be a couple feet wide, but they house thousands of hornets. Once the nest is found, we put on protective gear to keep us safe. Then we secure the tree. We suck out any of the live hornets into that modified vacuum you see there. Then we're going to drop the tree, remove the nest, and pull it out, and we will have a successful eradication. Now, since there aren't very many hornets here, and since we've now eradicated them all, we've been working overseas where hornets, there's many more where we can research and study them, find if there's a trap that's more selective, grab hornets from across the globe to analyze their DNA and see exactly where they're coming from. This research is ongoing. However, I do want to note that wildfires have impacted some of the areas, so just put your thoughts and feelers out to people that may be impacted. However, here on the home front, there's still something that y'all can do. Now, northern giant hornet, Asian giant hornet, murder hornet, whatever you want to call it, it will always kind of look the same. And you can help idea. You're going to want to look for anywhere from 1.5 to 2 inches in size will be your first factor. But the second thing you're going to want to look for is its lateral striping on its abdomen. These are kind of straight lines across. There isn't any spots. There isn't any teardrops. And then look for its large orange-yellow head. It would be like me kind of having a pumpkin on my head. Our heads just aren't that wide. Here's the hornet side to side next to a cicada killer. This is one of the most commonly misreported things in Washington that is comparable in size. And you'll notice the head and the distinguishing lines on it there. Now, I do have to let you know that there's a new hornet on the scene in the eastern United States, and you'll see it up here, the yellow-legged hornet in the middle. This has been detected in Savannah, Georgia in August 2023, and then later they destroyed 18 nests, and then later in November 2023, it was trapped in South Carolina. In 2024, they destroyed a first and secondary nest. So in addition to the northern giant hornet, it's just always good to keep an eye on the lookout for things that may not be here. If you ever want to find more information on the hornet, we have a great webpage for you to visit. And then if you ever think you have seen one, I really encourage you to try to use that cell phone and grab a picture. And then you can go online and you can make a report, send that to us in an email, or even call our hotline. So while the hornets have been successfully eradicated, it's not to say that they could be reintroduced, brought over, or something could happen again. But more on the terms of something that we're currently working on and that you can be helping as well is this pest here, and that is going to be Japanese beetle. Over the past recent years, we've been finding it in Yakima, Benton, Franklin County, and historically and more recently in King County as well. Right now, Japanese beetles actually living beneath our feet as a grub or a larva. It's dormant, but it's getting ready to wake up. You're going to want to look for a white C-shaped grub in the spring. It's going to have brown tan head and visible legs, anywhere from 1/8 to 1 inch long. And it really likes to feast primarily on grass roots. And what happens is people will start to water their lawn in the spring. It just won't turn green. It will create these brown patches in the lawn from where they have fed. Then when you have a bunch of yummy grubs in your lawn, you're going to invite other critters, rodents, and stuff to come in and pick that lawn up further. So think about all your grass buffets that you have in your yard, at your church, at your school. And especially golf courses, these are places where Japanese beetles can really get in, their grubs can feast and flourish. Then as we get closer into the summertime, adults are going to hatch out. And you're going to want to look for a green metallic head and copper wing covers. People often tell me it looks like a ladybug due to its shape, but it's got different colors. It's about the size of your pinky finger, anywhere from 1/3 to 1/2 inch long. And you might not see them, but you'll see the clusters of the destruction that they cause. They love roses and flowers, and they love green and leafy material. They will skeletonize, as you see in the picture here. And the problem with them is they don't really discriminate. They feed on over 300 different types of plants. Now, they're invasive, so they're going to like some of our ornamental things. For all of you that like to read and see lists, here's your common host plants. Now, in terms of the Japanese beetle could harm us because of that damage I showed you it could just do. It could also harm us because it comes with a wave of federal regulations states and Canada must follow. Here's a map of the United States I have for you, and I'll show you what these colors mean. Purple is where Japanese beetle has established. It started in Riverton, New Jersey about 1914, and since then it started spreading across the state. These places have looked for it, not found it. In some places it's being found and worked on eradicating it. So what you can say is, Japanese beetle, it's in the East Coast. It's going to stay there. We don't have it established in Washington. However, for the past 6 years, we've been finding populations and we're working on actively eradicating it. 5 years, I'm sorry, since 2020. And what this means for us is if we don't work to eradicate Japanese beetle and it is here to stay, we might have to answer to these federal rules and regulations. And that will tell the states around us that we have Japanese beetle and we will have more things to do before we can move goods, which will cost farmers money, time, and other states, they might choose a different place to get our goods. So apart from the destruction that Japanese beetle just causes, there's another thing to keep in mind. As the temperatures warm up, those grubs are going to become active eating those grass roots this spring. And then later, as the summer gets closer, they will hatch into those adults, which will be above the surface. This could be anywhere from May to October, but you'll definitely be seeing them later in June and July. They will be above the surface, eating, mating, dropping some eggs, eating, mating, dropping some eggs. And then in the fall, those eggs will have hatched and those grubs will be in the soil moving some more. Here's another great life cycle picture for you to look at. Now, Japanese beetle isn't found everywhere in Washington, but it does have the chance to spread pretty easy. If we think about soil and what time of the year it is, I could have Japanese beetle eggs or larvae in it pretty much whenever. So if I pick up some infested soil and I move it, I could be spreading Japanese beetle. This also goes to show for potted plants. If I have a nice plant that I'm growing outside of my front porch, beetles are eating it, and then I move, I could be moving Japanese beetle. And then the same situation for if I'm living in an area where beetles are flying around, they're eating my plants, I'm mowing my lawn, and then I'm moving that yard waste, I could also be spreading Japanese beetle. So here in Washington, we're working on that eradication program. And like I said, it's been a couple years and we're going to continue to work on it. It will continue to be multiple years of trapping for the beetle, treating for the beetle, and also quarantine. Now, different states, they kind of all have this trifold approach where we use multiple things to help beat the beetle. Trapping for the beetle is a good line of defense for you to know if you have Japanese beetle. They come in different shapes and sizes. They have a pheromone lure at the top that attracts the beetle, and then they essentially just die in the bag, and they aren't able to lay as many eggs. So it also is a good line of defense for catching those beetles to help control and slow that population down. Here is a map of where we placed Japanese beetle traps last year. Those are going to be the black dots for you. And here's an overlay of where they were caught. You'll see some up there in King County. This is over by SeaTac, and then in the lower Yakima Valley. As you get in your car in Yakima, you'll start to see them in Wapato, and then again into Sunnyside, Grandview, Mapton, leaving as you get into Prosser, and then again, unfortunately, in the Tri-Cities in Pasco. In addition to trapping for the beetles, we also treat residents' lawns for free. Treatments happen in the spring. However, residents are required to sign up with the state. So if you're a member of that lower Yakima Valley or in the Tri-Cities, you might need to sign up for your spring treatment. We need to be able to access your property and apply an insecticides to target those grubs. So if so, I need you to scan this QR code or type in this website and click the sign up now button. Super easy to sign up for treatments. It'll take you to the web page. You enter your PIN and off you go. Now, if you don't know your PIN, you can contact us. People in the treatment area may have received a letter with this PIN to sign up. However, if you know you're in the area and you didn't get the letter, just give us a whirl and we'll get that over to you. But how Japanese beetle treatments work is they treat your property to be free of beetles. And after a couple years, those populations will begin to decline. However, it's an all effort. If I treat my lawn and my neighbor treats my lawn, we're covered. But if my other neighbor down the way doesn't, they're going to grow Japanese beetles, and soon those beetles will be back to populate my house. So it's really an effort where everybody needs to work together to educate each other and get ready for Japanese beetle treatments. In addition to that, there is an area where we impose a quarantine. And this is a rule that basically helps us prevent the spread of Japanese beetle. Here's a map for you, and anywhere inside this orange boundary is where Japanese beetle could be present. I know this because this is where my traps have caught Japanese beetle. Any materials from this area are restricted to move outside of the boundary if they could help spread the beetle. So we've created a yard waste drop-offs for residents to leave their yard waste, and we work behind the scenes with farmers so that they can still operate but mitigate the risks and not spread Japanese beetle outside of the boundary. Just like every successful program like the Hornets, there's lots of education and outreach where we work to educate and talk to members and residents in the community, attend local events, and help to get them signed up for treatments. Now, if you want to learn more about the Japanese beetle program, again, go to our website. But the cool thing for this is that there is an interactive map on the home screen. You can scroll down and you can open this map to type in your address to see if you are near a beetle detection in real time, or to see if you're in a treatment or a quarantine area. The other thing you can do from that website is sign up to stay informed. You can sign up for email updates that will come about monthly, bi-monthly, and you can also join a Facebook group to connect with others. We do run and monitor it, but this is the best way to get your updates on what's going on with the project. Most importantly, if you are out traveling and about this summer and you suspect to see Japanese beetle, take that picture and send it in. You can go online and upload it, shoot it to us in an email, or give us a phone call if you suspect to see Japanese beetle. Now that's it from me. We do cover some other things, so if you ever want to get in touch with us at the PEST program or me, go ahead and shoot an email, give us a phone call, or go online to those websites. Okay. If you happen to have any questions for me on Northern Giant Hornet or the Murder Hornet as you probably know it, go ahead and put them in the Q&A. Without that being said, I am going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen and turn it over to the next presenter.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Appreciate the opportunity to join today. This is a slightly probably unique topic to most of you. I'm here to talk about an aquatic pest and in legal language, a prohibited aquatic invasive species to the state of Washington, and a threat that is not yet present in Washington, but has significant risk to our agriculture, our economy, and our way of life. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Justin Bush. I am the Department of Fish and Wildlife's Aquatic Invasive Species Division Manager, and look forward to talking to you about this important issue today. What you see pictured here has different life stages similar to any pest. What you see on the left is actually a microscopic veliger of a quagga mussel that was found in the free-flowing Snake River in 2023 by the state of Idaho Department of Agriculture. And on the right is an example of what these invasive mussels look like when they're adults with a nickel for context of size. So I realize that this may be new for a lot of you, so we'll spend some time on the background, orienting you to the life stages, as well as when you may find the species. And while it's not known to be in Washington today, it is on the horizon. We're considering the Washington state to be under imminent threat, so do want you to be aware. And similar to what you've heard from other speakers, if you think you've found an invasive mussel, ask you to report it either to the State Department of Fish and Wildlife or the Washington Invasive Species Council. You'll hear about that more, I believe, next. What is unique about freshwater invasive mussels is that they're the only mussel in the state of Washington that attaches to hard surfaces. So thinking about how to identify the species, number one is size, and you see on the life cycle chart the size difference between our native mussels and invasive freshwater quagga and zebra mussels. So size is a big indicator, but also whether or not it's attached to hard surfaces. And the mussels attach to hard surfaces with byssal threads that essentially attach to the hard surface and then become hard, similar to the hardness of concrete. And as we think about the risk economically and environmentally, that's also part of the problem with this pest, in that they attach to hard surfaces. One generation grows on top of the next to the point where there's significant fouling that can impede the movement of water. Thinking about the life cycle, it's also worth noting that at different stages of life, the free-floating larvae, as well as the swimming larvae, are microscopic. They then become juveniles, where they are then settlers and start to settle to hard surfaces and attach to them. That's when they're visible to the human eye. So thinking about the risk, and we'll talk about prevention and how to be a part of the solution here, but you need to note that in different life stages, these invasive species can be in the water but not have them be visible to the human eye. That is a challenge, as I'm sure you would appreciate, much like the Japanese beetle that's underground. Densities can reach really high densities, up to 20,000 per square foot. One generation will also grow on the next. And when we see this in terms of fouling of water systems or pipes, you'll see that eventually a pipe will close and the diameter will reduce and reduce until it closes, similar to a clogged artery. They were introduced to North America through contaminated ballast water in large vessels. That's a whole nother hour-long talk, probably not as interesting to this group. But a vessel that's moving across the ocean or any large body of water, when it's empty, it's actually unsafe and it's unstable. So vessels pump water into holding tanks from the environment, and that helps increase the stability. And when they are ready to be loaded with commodities, they pump that water out into the environment, and that can be a problem. There are treatment systems and protocols, state and federal laws, to avoid issues, but that is how invasive mussels came to the Great Lakes in the late 1980s, and that's still a threat today. The mussels were introduced to the Great Lakes in the late 1980s. They've now been moving overland, north, south, and west through time, through human activities, which much like the Japanese beetle story, it's very similar, very common in certain areas of the eastern United States. Significant risk to the western United States and the state of Washington, and many reasons to want to prevent that and then also eradicate it if introduced. So looking at some of the risks, we know that the fouling can become so intense that the weight actually impacts the ability for our infrastructure to function. What you see on the upper right-hand side of the screen is a pinstock gate, controls the flow of water in hydroelectric dams or flood control dams. The pinstock gate, in this case at Davis Dam on the lower Colorado River, became so fouled and so heavy that the machinery that lifted and lowered the pinstock gate actually broke and failed to function, which is a safety concern and ultimately had to be replaced. And on the lower photo on the right, you see what we're concerned about when we're thinking about the economic risk is the complete fouling and inoperability of infrastructure. And we know, based on a state agency study in 2017, that invasive mussels, if introduced to our state, would cost over $100 million annually just to keep our hydroelectric systems functioning. So thinking about pinstock gates that need to be cleaned, anti-fouling paints that need to be applied, thinking about the operating costs of changing machinery, thinking about installing systems to ensure that pipes don't become fouled or potentially replacing those pipes, the annual cost is over $100 million. That is not increased prevention, that is not management costs. Those costs are just to keep the water flowing in our hydroelectric facilities. We haven't performed a study looking at other sorts of impacts to infrastructure, but we know, based on experience in other areas of the world or in the United States, that it's reasonable to assume that this level of annual cost for maintenance and mitigation, the $100 million, is likely a similar cost we can anticipate to keeping fish hatcheries, fish passage systems, agricultural irrigation systems, drinking water and wastewater facilities, legacy data centers that use raw water, as well as navigational locks functioning. Not so much as the lock gates becoming so encrusted that they don't open and close, but actually there are pumps that use raw water in those systems to raise and lower the water level within those navigational locks. So certainly a huge concern. So it's fair to say that this is a $100 million threat to our economy. Realistically, it's substantially greater than that. There's also some other economic risks that the state feels alarmed about, to put it nicely. We know that the Columbia River, for example, moves over $31.2 billion in commodity and products. Much of those are agricultural products. We are the Columbia River and the Snake River specifically are the leading gateway for trade in moving wheat out of Washington. And then also the second trade commodity would be soy and corn moving down the Columbia and Snake Rivers as well. So thinking about fouling that impacts the Columbia River and the movement of vessels and those commodities, those dollars stack up very quickly. We also know, and I got this information from Director Sanderson actually, that 75% of Washington's agricultural output is produced through irrigated agriculture. That cost is over $9.6 billion annually. The fouling and the movement of villagers that then become settlers and adults certainly would create the opportunity for irrigation systems to be fouled and clogged and cease to operate, as well as downstream users of water. Thinking about center pivot irrigation systems, for example, there would be the possibility where the farmer themselves may be impacted economically, having to replace pipes and other things. And then, beyond that, Washington is known for recreation in the outdoors. We know that outdoor recreation is worth over $20 billion annually. Thinking about stand-up paddleboarding, kayaks, boating, really, being on the water, in the water is very much what it means to be a Washingtonian. That is high risk. We're talking about billions of dollars annually. And with recreation, that would mean that folks would recreate elsewhere. If you lose your recreational opportunity, it's likely that people will choose their free time elsewhere. What is something that's difficult to think about is that loss of recreation in vulnerable communities. So those that are most at risk, that lack the resources to recreate elsewhere, probably can't spend their free time and their vacations and their free time activities in a whole different area. they wouldn't have those resources. And so if the loss of that local recreational activity occurred, it may just cease to exist for vulnerable communities. Beyond that economics, we're also looking at environmental impacts. We know that much like any invasive species, there will be competition with native species, and oftentimes the native species are the loser. Thinking about endangered mussels, for example, we know that shells actually can become so colonized that those endangered mussels have become impacted and potentially may go extinct. The mussels themselves actually filter the water and filter nutrients, so leaving toxins, filtering out the beneficial nutrients that are needed. And the filtering actually changes the water quality as well as the transparency. So we may see an increase of noxious weeds in some area or other aquatic plants that will become an issue. In the Great Lakes, for example, the filtration is so intense that there really are no more aquatic plants. And it's actually become a scuba diving destination where you can see hundreds of feet through the water. Thinking about aquatic plants as well as animals that rely on those aquatic plants and that water quality, that's a huge problem for our state. We know that filter feeding actually increases harmful algal blooms as well as different bacteria growing. We anticipate reduced oxygen content that then has effects on fisheries. What's interesting is that filtration actually, some pollutants will become bioaccumulated in the mussels, which increases exposure time to species of value. And really that habitat loss, we are anticipating decreased populations of our native species, things that are extremely valuable, and we're investing hundreds of millions of dollars in annually to protect and enhance, such as salmon and steelhead. Thinking about indirect impacts, at different times of the year, the southern resident killer whales that are endangered, their primary food source are Columbia River Chinook. If the Columbia River Chinook populations are negatively impacted, there's less prey available in the river, we would see species that are at risk, like the southern resident killer whale, also become more at risk. And if that's not bad enough, there are also cultural concerns as well as human health concerns. There's literature that shows increased botulism in bacteria that could impact humans and human health. We know that there will be harmful algal blooms and cyanobacteria increases based on the experience in the Great Lakes. And ultimately, looking at the photo on the top right, those are razor sharp mussel shells up to a foot thick on our shorelines. Imagine your favorite river or lakeside where you take your family to recreate, razor sharp shells all over the shoreline. It's really not the type of place that you're going to be recreating in because you may be cut and sliced open. So that plus the stench of dead mussels kind of changes what it means to be a Washingtonian, which is kind of the threat that's hardest to express, is that our sense of place and really our way of life in Washington's at risk and may be impacted in a way that we can never undo that damage. Kind of beyond that, there's also the impact to treaty protected resources, tribal use of resources and tribal way of life. And then really there are things that can be done to mitigate these impacts economically. Those cost money forever. Oftentimes those costs will be borne by ratepayers. So if power facilities need $100 million in annual maintenance, that means the power rate will go up, and we all will be paying more for things. And I think at this time we would all prefer to not pay more for things. So someone wise once told me that a picture's worth 1,000 words, and so just putting two of them together, wanted to show two different visions of Washington. One would be, fresh, clean water with abundant fish and wildlife, abundant recreation, clean energy, and all the trade associated with riverine systems. Contrasting that with what we can expect in a freshwater environment that's become invaded by quagga zebra mussels. So I mentioned that we feel like we're the imminent threat in the state of Washington today. 20 years of effort have gone into protecting the Western United States, specifically the Columbia River Basin from introduction and establishment of invasive freshwater mussels, one perimeter defense, and working together across states and provinces to this end goal. In September of 2023, the world really shifted, and having worked with invasive species for over 20 years, I feel pretty confident that this is probably the single most impactful invasive species event of our generation. Sorry, northern giant hornet. But thinking about all the potential impacts that I just referenced, it is likely that we will be experiencing these if we don't make the smartest decisions today. The state of Idaho, through routine monitoring, something that we do in Washington as well, as you'll see, found three floating veligers in the Snake River near Twin Falls. You see the veliger there. You see on the map little hash marks. Those are not dams or impoundments. Those are actually U.S. Geological Survey river miles. These free-floating mussels are 375 river miles from the state of Washington. The state of Idaho has a rapid response plan, and they executed it very well, performing a treatment, very aggressive and robust treatment, trying to eradicate the species. Unfortunately, additional veligers were found in the free-floating Snake River in that same area in September of 2024. You'll see that the state of Washington is becoming more ready, and there's things you can do to help us. But this is why we feel like we are at imminent threat. It is uncertain how long it takes for veligers to float downstream 375 miles, when they may establish, and when they may establish to such a point we can detect them in monitoring. We know from Idaho Power it takes approximately 1 week for surface water to flow that distance. Idaho executed their treatment 3 weeks after they made their announcement. That's very uncertain for us, but what's not uncertain is that risk that we face. Due to this risk and due to this uncertainty, our state legislature actually took action and requested additional state funds for the State Department of Fish and Wildlife, $1.81 million in one-time funds that are being used today up until June 30th. They also gave us the authority to leverage that for federal funds through the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers for that same amount. This is what we're using today. And this federal cost share program exists because those dams and that infrastructure that the Corps of Engineers is responsible for, there's such that great risk that they're willing to cost share all of these activities to prevent, monitor, and respond to the invasive mussels. So we're thinking very hard about downstream movement in the Snake River of invasive mussels, but it's more of a complex narrative, and this is kind of leading to how y'all can help. But much like the Japanese beetle map, you can see on the East Coast and in the Midwest, quagga and zebra mussels are very common, very well established, and will not be eradicated. However, you can see the uninfested West, and the little blue dots are watercraft inspection stations trying to prevent the movement and introduction of these species. So you can see the threat that we're facing, and illustrating that threat and the movement of humans and human activities is a map on the right showing vessels that were inspected at different mandatory check stations across the West that came from the Twin Falls water body in the Snake River. And over the course of a year, you can see that vessels are moving out of that area across the whole Western United States. At least one is headed to Alaska, and 173 entered the state of Washington that were inspected at our borders. Those vessels are potentially contaminated. We don't have any information to say that they were, but it shows how vessels and watercraft and other conveyances are moving across the Western United States. And then thinking about all the infested water bodies with the Snake River as an example shows you the complexity and the risk. Yeah, to make matters worse, invasive mussels also move through other pathways connected to human activities. This is something that we experienced in 2021, also experienced this August, and that's the map and the photos that you see here. The Department of Fish and Wildlife received an alert from a fish wholesaler in Renton, Washington, that actually shows the mussel in the top right of a contaminated nursery product that the person believed had invasive mussels on it. We then, because we had additional funding as a state, deployed a team within minutes to that site We collected samples and some information. We determined they were indeed zebra mussels, a relative of quagga mussels, but all the same problems, same idea essentially. And we were able to work with the Washington State Department of Agriculture and the U.S. Department of Agriculture to perform a trace forward as well as a trace back of how these contaminated products enter the United States. We also collaboratively, as those state agencies and federal agencies, were able to determine where the Washington contaminated products, potentially contaminated products, went within Washington, and we were able to track down 2,000 potentially contaminated products and destroy them, which is great. What we've learned is that all of Washington's potentially contaminated products and the nation's came from an importer in the state of Florida. The exporter of these potentially contaminated products was based in Ukraine within the native range of the mussels. They were illegally imported to the United States, to Florida, where they were then distributed, as you see in the lower map. 26,000 potentially contaminated products went around the United States. Washington was able to track down and destroy the 2,000 that we received. We can't say that for those other states, so illustrating the risk. So how do we combat this, and really kind of how do you fit into all this? We work together across states and provinces to inspect watercraft and their conveyances, ensuring that state laws are being followed. And we'll get to that, but you can see here the dots on the map illustrate all the different watercraft inspection stations and how we're all working together to the same ends. In the state of Washington, this is more focused on our own activities. We have 5 different check stations that are set up in Washington State. And you can see that we're regularly inspecting more than 50,000 watercraft that stop at our stations. Kind of illustrating that risk and the imminent threat we're facing, you can also see that we are intercepting between 13 and 39 vessels that have invasive mussels on them annually. So we're very concerned about the Snake River downstream movement, but this shows that we've been at risk for quite some time. And we are really pleased to have staff and dedicated time to try to prevent the establishment and the introduction to our state at our borders, at our check stations. But we also do it through the use of a trained canine. His name is Finn. Finn is based in Spokane and works with his handler, Nick Noss, on a daily basis, inspecting watercraft, and also is stationed occasionally down in Clarkston due to the risk and the imminent threat on the Snake River. So our tactic is one of prevention, preventing the problem first off. When an issue is found in an invasive mussel is found in a watercraft, our tactic is then one of decontamination, so rendering the threat useless. And we do this primarily through the use of hot water. It's our best tool that we have. And what's kind of unique is that our state authorities of prevention and not moving quagga or zebra mussels actually apply broadly to all biological materials on boats and trailers and equipment. And so the mantra is clean, drain, dry. So you want to clean off all the mud, all the biological material, drain all that water out because some things are microscopic, and then let it dry for a certain amount of time so that any biological material or diseases would then be killed. And what I want to show with this is that we have decontaminated the last year more than 2,100 conveyances, boats. And we did this because they didn't meet our clean, drain, dry authorities. So we not only prevented invasive mussels from entering our waters and establishing, but a lot of what was prevented were the introduction and movement of aquatic noxious weeds, which we all know is a huge threat to our waters as well for similar reasons. Which leads us to something very noteworthy. And with our increased state funding this year, we were able to have increased staffing at our check stations. And our tactic in Washington has been trying to have check stations open year-round at some level. In January, at our Spokane station, 2 vessels arrived on trailers that were very large tugboats. And they weren't announced. We didn't know they were coming. They just happened to stop. They saw a sign and stopped. And upon inspection, one tugboat was actually not very fouled. The other was the most fouled by volume that we've ever found. And what's unique about this is the origin point was Lake Michigan, so where zebra mussels was introduced to the U.S., the Great Lakes. These tugboats were in the Great Lakes, heavily fouled with invasive mussels, were purchased by a new company in Washington. Vessels made their way to Washington. They were not inspected or intercepted prior to Spokane. They just happened to pull in. And we were able to remove over 21 gallons of invasive mussels. And our analysis showed, because we have independent labs and we sent these to, that they were most likely quagga and zebra mussels, so kind of unique, but also that they may have been alive. That's pretty scary in that had they not pulled into our station, had we not had the funding to staff it, these could have entered our waters. What this also pointed out is that other states that aren't staffing their check stations to our level have their stations closed. It's in wintertime. It's not really recreational boating season. And often most states shut down operations. Had our Spokane station not been opened, we would not have intercepted this issue. So very notable and also kind of concerning. When prevention fails, we want to have robust early detection monitoring so we can find the very first introduction and occurrence, so that we can apply limited resources in order to try to eradicate, meaning fully remove the population from our state. It's key that we find that pioneering population as quickly as possible, and we do this through robust early detection monitoring across the state. We use eDNA, we use visual surveys, we take plankton toes, and then they're analyzed under a microscope. We also have settling plates that you can pull up on a rope and look at, as well as taking ponar grabs, kind of a bite, if you will, out of the substrate on the bottom. We are monitoring statewide. What's great here is that we were able to increase our monitoring by 13% total this year with increased funding. And what we did with increased funding was actually hire a new team of 2 to do nothing but monitor the Snake River and Lake Wallula the entire season. And they're still monitored today, actually. And we did this because of that uncertainty. How long does it take villagers to flow from the Snake River in Idaho to Washington? How long does it take for them to settle and establish before we can detect them? We don't really know. So the answer is just monitor, monitor, monitor. But we don't do this ourselves, and this is key to all invasive species. I'm sure you've heard it from other speakers today. No one organization can solve this problem or prevent this problem. And we work with public utilities, we work with tribal nations, academic institutions, to not only do the monitoring that our department does, but also promote others to do monitoring. There's not enough monitoring that we can do. And we've been doing this for many years. We have really great partnerships. But the thing to note is that with increased state funding, we were actually able to give the Kalispel Tribe of Indians funding to develop a monitoring program. Historically, the Kalispel Tribe did not monitor for invasive mussels in Boundary Reservoir, water flowing from Idaho into Washington. And so we were able to provide some seed funding and training and best practices. And now the Kalispel Tribe will be doing monitoring ongoing annually, which is great. We really want to try to do some of those targeted investments in the long term. When we find the first occurrence, our tactic is one of rapid response with the goal of eradication. When Idaho did their treatment in 2003 as well as 2004, we requested to send staff to be on site to kind of take it all in, be observers. What we learned is that we're ready, but we've never been more ready, but we're not ready enough. So we immediately took action, updated our state response plan. We're now creating a Snake River response plan kind of focused on more fine scale details, assuming that villagers will flow downstream in the Snake River at some point. But we're also one of the few states that's actually practiced on the ground response. We did this back in 2021 with the Washington Invasive Species Council, with funding from the Bureau of Reclamation and Lake Roosevelt. Most states do not proactively try these activities before they need them. We believe as a state that you should have a plan, you should practice it, and practice it so that you can actually be efficient and effective when the time comes. Most states don't do that. Most states don't eradicate invasive mussels. So won't go into huge depth on this, but just kind of wanted to give you an idea of all the things we're doing this one year. These are things that will be completed by the end of June, so they're kind of in progress. Is a state, we've responded to an invasive species for 3 years now. There's a European green crab emergency that is a governor's emergency that is ongoing. We know how to bring together different jurisdictions, develop shared objectives, and then to reach them through that process. We want to set that same framework up and identify all those different organizations now to help, number one, help us become more prepared, more ready, but when the time comes, to help inform efficient, effective response. So we're working on that. We want to fully staff our stations, our check stations, and this is a great example showing that reason why we want to have check stations open year-round based on those tugboats. We are moving toward getting another mussel sniffing dog. We have one-time funding. Dogs have a 12-year service life, so that's an issue. But we're looking into some contracted dogs in the short term, and then the Nez Perce tribe is looking at getting their own canine, which we'd love to share or partner on. And then I mentioned we're doing intense monitoring. We also wanted to think about other pathways, thinking about the movement of pets, for example, thinking about food fish aquaculture. This was a really kind of forward-thinking approach in this based on the August Marymount Mossball incident. But we're also looking at things like fish transport and movement permits that the state issues. You cannot transport and introduce fish without a permit. One, to prevent diseases, but also to prevent things like invasive mussels. There is a high number of private fish farms on the Snake River in Idaho, downstream of their treatment area. We're very concerned about the movement of fish and water in fish tankers that could be introducing this issue as well. And then thinking about response, we are looking at contractors that may help us on short notice. But within the Department of Fish and Wildlife, we have teams that treat invasive species or unwanted fish in lakes using chemicals like rotenone. And we're trying to position them to be our go-to rapid response group. So we're making some progress there. But this is something the legislature really challenged us to think about is we need to also think about a situation where we may not be able to eradicate the issue. What does that look like? There are screens, UV treatment systems, things that can mitigate the problem on infrastructure to keep our irrigation systems running, to keep our dams running. We don't really know what they are, what the planning horizon is, or what the cost is. So we are working to identify those costs, that planning horizon. We will publish that information so that resource managers can make good decisions. And then this is kind of where everyone comes in. It's never been more important to follow simple, clean, drain, dry practices to prevent introducing and moving aquatic invasive species. So we all need to get the word out, and we're trying in a big way because the data show that the general public is just not aware of the issue, not aware of the threat, and then not aware of the laws that they should be following in order to be part of the solution and not causing this problem. So we're working really hard on that, and that's why I'm happy to be here today. So the message is clean all plants, animals, and mud from your boat, your gear, really anything that touches raw water. Drain all the water out from your boat, your gear on land, and then letting it dry. Let everything dry off so that if there was a disease or a mussel villager either on or in your boat, that it would become neutralized. It's fairly simple. It's really easy to do. You just gotta know and you gotta plan and then follow through on it. And then kind of beyond that, there's other messages. This is one we developed at the State Invasive Species Council, thinking about the pet pathway. The kids get it. Pets belong in the aquarium. They belong in your home. They don't belong in the environment. And taking simple practices and not dumping unwanted pets will protect us from diseases as well as invasive mussels. Real quickly, and I know I'm coming up on time, but wanted to also let you all know about golden mussels. There's a new freshwater invasive mussel threat, a first in the nation detection in California of last year, was made similar to quagga and zebra mussels. This is akin to the northern giant hornet detection in Washington. This is a first in the nation detection. We know that we're at significant risk. We know that it is a global invasive species. Nationally, it's considered a high risk. I'm really interested in the data from Brazil. $120 million in impacts to their electricity sector. Sounds familiar. Sounds like $1 million that we're projecting, 100 million that we're projecting in our own dams. Where are they? They are moving quickly. Once you look, you find things sometimes. And it's anticipated these were introduced to the United States through ballast water in a brackish port in California. You can see they've now spread about 200 miles away from that initial point of detection. What's really, really scary is that the last one here says coastal aqueduct. And these upper ones here, actually, they don't yield forebay for an aqueduct. What's that mean? It means that this is probably going to be a big problem for California and will be for us. Thinking about the Governor Brown California Aqueduct, series of aqueducts all across the state of California, moving water to Southern California. The mussels are in that. That's not good for us. We know that we're at risk. We know that based on pulling data from our watercraft inspection stations, that more than 53 vessels came from that infested water body. Those potentially contaminated vessels were inspected and were cleaned and dried. This illustrates the risk. And then thinking about ballast water, we get vessels less than 20 a year at our ports from the Stockton area, but we're measuring ballast water discharge in metric tons. And so it's kind of a whole different scale and a whole different scale of risk. But this is something we're really, really concerned about, and we're working really hard to think about new prevention activities. The last thing we want is to spend 20 years to protect us from quagga and zebra mussels moving east while we leave the back door open and gold mussels start moving east from the western introduction. So in summary, we believe we're an imminent threat today. You can help us by following really simple clean, drain, dry practices. You can also help us by not dumping your aquarium products into the environment, and you can also help us by being aware of this issue and then reporting any sightings. Really simple. If it's a mussel and it's attached to something, that's a huge red flag. With that, appreciate your time, and we'll pass it to the next speaker or to you, Joshua Milnes. Thank you all.
I'm going to go ahead and take it back. Thanks for the presentation, Justin. Your next code word is coming.
Well, hi, everybody. It's so good to be here. A lot of folks online today. My name is Jessica LaBelle, and I'm the Invasive Species Program Specialist for the Washington Invasive Species Council. And I'm here today to talk to you about what the Council is and the Council's statewide invasive species strategy. So to make sure that we're all on the same page, let's go ahead and define invasive species. So if you Google it, you're going to find a lot of definitions out there for invasive species. They're not necessarily wrong, but in the state of Washington, we actually define invasive species in law. And that is as non-native organisms that cause economic or environmental harm and that are capable of spreading to new areas of the state. So this includes both terrestrial and aquatic plants, animals, insects, and even wildlife diseases. So how do invasive species move around? Well, the answer is that anything that moves really can move an invasive species, and whether that's noxious weed seeds or New Zealand mud snails that are grabbing onto your boots, insects using your car, like unpaid rideshare services, critters of various kinds sneaking into shipping containers, or like Justin Bush talked about, pets being released into the natural environment where they don't belong. And we can separate these different means of invasive species moving around into groups called pathways. And understanding pathways helps us understand how invasive species can spread to other parts of the state, both intentionally and unintentionally, and allows us to strategize on how to prevent and stop the spread and the associated impacts of different invasive species. They do have a variety of negative effects if those pathways are not addressed and invasive species spread is left unchecked. We can deal with things like the predation of valuable native species, loss of native habitat and natural resources, reduced recreational opportunities, and even the increased risk of fire threats. And when we're addressing pathways, it's important to realize that invasive species really do not respect jurisdictional boundaries. So to successfully prevent or stop the spread of new or already present species, we really need each organization and individual to accept the responsibility to work together to address the program. So from a global to a neighborhood scale, there's a role for everybody. to ensure success. But what guiding body supports and unites all these efforts? Well, to formally work across administrative boundaries, the state legislature created the Washington Invasive Species Council in 2006 and has currently extended it until 2032. The council is charged with policy level direction, planning, and coordination. And one of the foundations of the council is development of an interagency statewide strategy that provides guidance to agencies, organizations, researchers, and the public for acting in coordinated ways. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. The council itself consists of representatives from multiple state, federal, municipal, and non-governmental organizations, as well as tribal nations. And it is composed of a broad spectrum of experts that really work together collaboratively. And you might recognize some of the names on here as people who are talking today. It's pretty cool. It's not just government that makes this council successful at addressing invasive species. It really requires a whole community approach. So that includes industry, researchers, volunteers, and the public. And I want to pause and give a big shout out to the Recreation and Conservation Office for being the administrative host of the council and its staff. So I'm an employee of both WISC and RCO. I love it. So how does the council decide what direction to move in? Well, unfortunately, like all states and the nation as a whole, we have way more issues than we have resources. So the council originally analyzed 700 different invasive species in and around Washington. And it's just way more than we have the resources for or the time to address. And time is really important when it comes to responding to invasive species. So this is a popular graphic in invasive species management. And it's called the bioinvasive curve. And it illustrates that as time goes on, the amount of resources needed to manage the impacts of a particular species really increases exponentially. So those of us in this field know that eradication is rarely a one and done, one-time cost. It makes prevention the best management strategy. And when things do manage to slip past our defenses, early detection and rapid response is going to be our best bet to achieve eradication. So as a council, we have many programs to strengthen both prevention and early detection and rapid response efforts and raise public awareness so that support occurs before you start feeling the impacts instead of after. So how do we prioritize a manageable number of high-risk species to ensure that efforts fall in the beginning of that curve? So at the statewide scale, the council developed an assessment tool to help determine prioritization. And it looks at invasive species that are in Washington. So here, species that are within the Pacific Northwest, but not yet in Washington, so near. And then far, which is going to be species that aren't in our region, but are headed our way. And the tool then analyzes the impact of those species, whether it's ecological, economic, or a risk to human health and safety, and then addresses our ability to prevent the species from being introduced if it's not in Washington, and the feasibility to contain and manage it if it is found in Washington. Within any organization, though, it's likely that there simply just isn't enough time or money to address every problem. So focusing our efforts on the biggest impacts are going to help ensure success. And our prioritization assessment tool also helps us articulate these issues, to decision makers and to those who can provide funding and support, which really helps the council tell these important stories. So on a really broad statewide scale, here you can see the results of the assessment that was initially done in 2009 and then updated in 2015. And it's important to have a process and to be adaptive as science and the situation on the ground really changes. It's also worth noting, there are very few hard lines in nature and pest management. So while this graphic kind of illustrates a general approach of all organizations to specific pests, it's not intended to be gospel or to be site specific or at a local scale. And you might need to change tactics and assessments for different places. But what is exciting is that I can share that we're currently updating the priority assessment tool to add the inclusion of cultural resource impacts. And we're going to be using that updated criteria to review the current list of species and see what additions or subtractions would be appropriate. So now that we've covered who we are and how we prioritize species, how do we prioritize actions for statewide invasive species management? So that's going to be where our 2020 through 2025 strategic plan comes into play. And the 2026-2030 plan is currently in development. The plan outlines 6 key strategic areas and key priorities and actions for each of them. And I'm going to go through them briefly. We're going to start with leadership and coordination. So the pest that might best illustrate the work of the council in terms of leadership and coordination is the statewide approach to feral swine. Feral swine can be descendants of Eurasian wild boars that were introduced long ago for hunting opportunities, or they can be domestic pigs that escaped captivity and have reverted to feral tendencies. Swine are spreading to new areas of the US through either range expansion or human-assisted movement. And then domestic pigs can break through their fencing and pens, but they can also be intentionally released by livestock owners that no longer wish to feed or care for them. To identify this pest in Washington state is relatively simple. If you see a pig outside of captivity, a pig outside a fence, it's a feral swine, even if it's a little cutie one like this. And that should really trigger notification and reporting so that we can act quickly and prevent the many impacts that feral swine cause, a few of which are, the destruction of crops, of pastures, of the environment, the predation of livestock and native wildlife, the potential spread of pathogens that affect both human and domestic animal health, the destruction of places that are important to us, whether that's landscaping, public parks, cemeteries, or even culturally significant sites and species. They're not currently established in Washington. If they were found, both state and federal agencies would be involved in responding to an introduction. And we have authorities that clearly state that feral swine will be, taken care of if they're found. And these authorities are shared in Washington state by the Washington State Department of Agriculture, as well as the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. And then monitoring and response activities are primarily performed by the U.S. Department of Agriculture Wildlife Services Program. And the council really plays a facilitation role when feral swine are reported and ensures that each agency is playing their role in a swift response. But how do we know how to go about that response? So prior to 2015, there was no formal plan to respond to feral swine between the agencies that have jurisdiction. And this changed when a sounder of feral swine was found in Grant County. And at that point, the agencies worked together to develop an interagency plan that outlines the process to be followed for each and every feral swine incident, with the council providing that leadership and coordination. And out of the creation of that interagency feral swine response plan, we started a new public awareness campaign and reporting hotline, encouraging people to, if you see a pig outside a fence, squeal on it. By calling the Squeal on Pigs hotline that I have listed there. And that number actually works for pigs in Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. And it works. Reporting works. We had an event in October of 2023 that shows just that. And it started with a sighting of a loose pig alongside the freeway in Starbuck, Washington. And a report came to the council through our email inbox, and council staff sent that report to USDA, APHIS, and Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife staff within the hour. The pig was successfully found and captured. And then they continued monitoring in that area just as a precaution in case the pig had friends, but it did not. So moving on to the next section of our strategic plan, which is innovation research. In 2020, the council worked with Washington State University Extension and the Division of Governmental Service Studies and Services to develop 2 studies to better understand how the council and partners might assist communities in their ability to prevent and respond to invasive species. So the survey and reports are for both municipal and tribal governments. I just have a picture of the tribal one here. And it's really intended to help understand their strengths, to identify gaps, form partnerships, and learn more about community needs as they relate to invasive species prevention and response. And through that report, one of the gaps identified was that programming and outreach was really needed in Spanish to reach Spanish-speaking communities and field workers who might be the first to spot invasive species. And as a result, the Council has facilitated a number of webinars and workshops in Spanish to help close that gap. So that ties into the next part of the plan, which is education and outreach. Okay, so WSDA documented 70 new invasive species introductions since 1991, and that study is a few years old by now. But this chart shows how the introductions were found. So either as the result of a targeted survey for that species specifically, as a non-target in a survey for a different species, whether it was found by biologists or then reported by the public, either to WSDA or to WSU Extension. And you can really see that's a large chunk of the pie, public reporting, and the role and the importance of the public in finding new invasive species in the state can really not be understated. So to help boost public reporting, we have educational campaigns, and these are a few of the ones that we're involved with. Each has a different focus on different species or type of species that what we're trying to prevent, and a call to action as to what the public can do about it. So there's Buy It Where You Burn It, which is about not moving firewood and all the little not friends that might be hiding in it. Don't Let It Loose, which asks people not to release their pets or dump their aquarium water into local waterways. We talked about Squeal on Pigs already. There's also Clean Drain Dry that we heard about earlier today, where you clean your boat and your water gear to prevent the spread of aquatic invasive species. Don't Pack a Pest is the one on the far right, and that's a scanned image showing a suitcase full of eels, as one might have. So please leave your eels at home. Don't be packing your eels. And then there's Play Clean Go, which is about keeping your recreational gear and your boots clean, which we're going to talk about later. So the council also celebrates education and outreach during the best week of the year, Invasive Species Awareness Week. That's a week at the end of every February that's proclaimed by the Washington governor to coincide with National Invasive Species Awareness Week. I'm getting excited just talking about it. It's pretty great. During the week, the council hosts a variety of workshops or webinars that spotlight invasive species efforts in the state. I highly encourage folks to join. They're just great. Okay, moving on to prevention. We might not be able to fully prevent invasive species from popping up in Washington, but we can be prepared through response readiness and understanding and addressing risk. So for example, urban forests, we don't necessarily think about them, but they're so important, and they're at the crossroads of movement of people, goods, and services. And they're one of the first places that is statistically likely to have an introduction of invasive species. So a great project with a really handy toolbox is the Urban Forest Pest Readiness Playbook. So this playbook was developed in partnership with the council for all communities, large and small, to better understand the threat to their urban forests and to close the readiness gap between state and federal entities and then local and municipal land managers. So all the components of the playbook are important, but what's really unique about it, I think, is the readiness assessment. So here's a snapshot of the readiness assessment, and it asks managers to consider several questions in advance of a plant health emergency, like, do you know what trees are at risk and where they are? Do you have the personnel and the protocols to be able to react quickly? Do you have good education and outreach in your community so you can inform residents what's happening so they support whatever readiness actions you might need to take? And considering these questions in advance of a problem really contributes to success when managing invasive species. So prevention covers a lot of territory, and let's shift from the urban to the rural. So the sagebrush steppe, oh, it's so hard to say. The sagebrush steppe is a unique biome that really encompasses a large portion of the western US and a significant amount of eastern Washington. And it's a beautiful and fragile ecosystem, and it covers 150 million acres across 13 states and provides habitat for 350 endangered, rare, or vulnerable species like the greater sage grouse. I don't just want to talk about it, I want to show it to you. And I'm based in Western Washington, but I love driving to Eastern Washington. I love crossing the Cascades and just seeing this sudden shift to this ecosystem. I just think it's so beautiful. And this is a photo that I took at Dry Falls State Park. I could look at it for a long time. But it's also an ecosystem that's extremely susceptible to invasive plants or noxious weeds. And those dramatically increase the risk of wildfire and the loss of these really precious species and areas. So with funding from the U.S. Forest Service, the council began a project to provide 50 Play Clean Go boot brush stations for areas around Washington's sagebrush steppe. And these stations, they have a stiff bristled brush that's fixed in place. So you can scrub your boots on it and get any mud, debris, or weed seeds off of there. And they're a great preventative measure for noxious weed seeds from being introduced into these sensitive areas. There have been 30 boot brush stations that have been distributed so far, and we're going to place another 20 this year. And these are photos of just a couple of them in place. And what's super great is they're being used. So if you build it, they will brush their boots. The stations also come with custom signage that tells people what to do and why. Always important when driving behavior, that people know why and why it's important. And then we're going to move on to the next element of the strategic plan, which is eradication, control, and containment. So having the authority to act on a priority species is paramount. And one function of the council is to participate in regulatory processes by reviewing and commenting, as an interagency body. Regulatory control, and refers to the role played by government agencies in trying to stop the entry or spread of invasive species. And in this case, the authority to take emergency measures against northern pike, which is a highly invasive predatory fish, was not available to the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife prior to 2019 because northern pike were classified as the lowest priority level of aquatic invasive species. So as their distribution changed and as new information was presented about the environmental and economic risk of this fish, it was reclassified with the assistance of the council. And northern pike is now a prohibited level 1 species in Washington state. And I gotta show you some northern pike. Sorry if it puts you off your lunch. Hopefully it won't. But here's some northern pike, including kokanee salmon that were found inside the stomach. One that ate a bat, which is just rude. I love bats. And one that ate a duck. And so the scale and the appetite of these fish is just incredible. So the council plays a support role in the management of many of the species that you're hearing about today. And I don't want to be repetitive of other speakers' content. So I'm not going to talk too much about invasive freshwater mussels, but I do want to highlight a specific event the council facilitated for invasive mussel control. So being up to speed on best management practices, how to mobilize quickly, and how to minimize impacts to surrounding native species and the landscape is really critical if something is detected. So in 2019, the council facilitated a first of its kind on the ground invasive mussel rapid response exercise in Lake Roosevelt. And this was a live practice scenario. It brought together 59 responders from 15 organizations and 2 countries to test containment systems and perform a mock treatment, to inspect and decontaminate boats, and perform monitoring by skilled divers, dogs, and scientists. And the exercise was a huge success, and there's a video about it that's hosted on YouTube and also on our website, which is invasivespecies.wa.gov. It's going to be on my end slide too. And then we move on to the last element of the strategic plan, which is early detection and rapid response. And we already heard about spotted lanternfly today, so I'm not going to repeat what was said, but I wanted to touch on this species also and the council's role in preparing for its possible entrance into Washington state. So this insect is a species of great concern with the amount and types of plants that it feeds on and the suitable habitat for it in Washington. In 2022, the council received a $90,000 grant from USDA APHIS to develop early detection and rapid response capabilities for this insect, with no idea when it might pop up or where. And to do that, we formed the Spotted Lanternfly Preparedness Advisory Group to develop a state action plan. I'm really proud to have been the facilitator for this group, and it was really unique because instead of just one agency writing the action plan, we had input from all the state and federal agencies that could be impacted by spotted lanternfly. And we had a variety of industry representatives and tribal nation as well. And we also contracted to develop different support tools like GIS maps and forms, outreach materials, and we held workshops to increase public and industry awareness. So these tools and the state action plan were completed in 2023, and they stand ready as a guide for response. And one of our best tools for early detection and rapid response is public reporting. So many agencies and organizations might have direct reporting hotlines or forms, but the public might not know who to contact for what species. So the council really fills the role of a central reporting hub. And one of the best ways to report a potential invasive species is via the Washington Invasives app. So this is a free app from the council. It's in the Apple and the Google Play Store, and it feeds directly into a national database of species data. And this just shows how easy it is to submit a report through the Washington Invasives app. It also doubles as a field guide, and you can also use it to submit unknown species. We have a video tutorial on our website also, which again will be on my end slide. So what happens after someone submits a report? Well, it does not just go into the ether. It sends an immediate notification to the Washington Invasive Species Council staff. So I get a ping in my inbox. And it also goes to any state and federal agencies that might be associated with the management of that species, and any local agencies that could be impacted as well. Then goes through a verification process, and that depends on what the lead agency is, what the species is, area of report, and if it's a high priority species of immediate concern. So here you can see a report that resulted in a teachable moment and ended focusing on the prevention of invasive species introduction. So the council staff were notified of goldfish, which can be highly invasive, being released into a local lake next to a school. And the council notified the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife Enforcement Division, which responded. And the next day, a local news station picked up the story. And this incident was used as a way to increase awareness across the state. And there were social media posts and news articles focusing on the harmful impacts of released and unwanted pets. And not every response has glamorous actions. In many cases, the public reports something that's widespread or something that is not a management priority. And in that situation, we work with university extension to educate folks and the landowners or managers for how to safely, efficiently, and effectively manage their problem. And you're going to hear more about European chafer a little later today. But some reports have very glamorous response, like when there's a first detector report that finds something of national or international significance. And the best example of that is the late 2019 report of Vespa mandarinia, which also known as northern giant hornet, which we heard about earlier today. And this was the first verified report of this animal in the US. This initial report led to unprecedented national and international interest, which I personally refer to as murder hornet madness. My invasive species career actually started with WSDA, so I got to see all this unfold. And I've never had my job go viral on the internet before or have people making memes about it. So that's a picture on the right of me holding a live brood comb of the first northern giant hornet nest found in the US. And I kind of look like I'm holding a pie on the Great British Baking Show. And I'm just as proud of it as if I had baked it. But as a result of that early detection, which was courtesy of a member of the public, rapid response efforts were successful. And as Cassie talked about earlier today, this insect was declared eradicated just a few months ago. It's a great success. So takeaway, if you see something, say something, please report invasive species. You can do that in a variety of ways. You can call these hotlines, the WSDA Pest Program hotline, the WDFW Emergency Aquatic Invasive Species hotline. You can the Squeal and Pigs hotline, or you can go to our website to report a sighting, or my favorite again, our mobile app. And this is my contact information. So please feel free to reach out with any questions you might have. Again, download the app for free in the Apple Store or the Google Play Store. And then our website is listed there too, invasivespecies.wa.gov.
Awesome. Thanks, Jessica. Again, if you have any questions for Jessica at this time, go ahead and post them in the chat box.